Today we are going to create this shop landing page. We have this foldable navbar with all of our nav links as well as some social icons. You can open and close this navbar by clicking those icons. We also have this cool shoe effect where you can toggle between different styles for one shoe. In addition, we have this text at the left that shows a price, for example, as well as some placeholder text and a button. So let's get started, guys. First of all, we have an HTML, a CSS and a JavaScript file. First of all, we are going to create a basic HTML template, and inside of the head we are going to link our CSS file as well as our index.js file by using the script tag, and we say let's take our index.js file and we want to have a defer attribute inside of this script tag. Now you might want to use some of the icons I've used over here, and if you want to use the exact same icons, you can just go to my GitHub repository. I will put a link into the description, and right here you can just download the images folder, which includes pretty much all of the images I've used for this entire page, but you also will have Facebook, email, close and so on. So all of the buttons that we're going to use for the navigation bar. Let's start by creating a div that has the ID of navbar minus closed. And now we will also create a div that has the ID of navbar minus open right below, and those are basically containers. This div will be the container for the closed version of the navbar, and this one will be the container for the open version of the navbar. And inside of the closed version of the navbar, we will have our icon. So we will say we will use an image. This image will be inside of our images folder, and it will be the menu.png icon. We're going to save the website. And as you can see, now we have this menu icon right here, which obviously looks terrible, but we are going to fix that later on. Right below this images folder, we will have another div that will have the class of socials where we will put our socials, and right here we will have an image that is going to link to images and will be our Twitter account, for example. Now we will duplicate this image a couple of times, and now we'll say the second image is basically Facebook, the third one is Instagram, for example, and the last one is our YouTube icon. Now we'll give every single one of those images a class of social minus icon. We're going to copy this class and give this class to the other ones as well. And now we'll also give our image at the top a class that will be the class of nav minus icon, for example. So now we have to style this navbar closed as well as the icon. So we're going to go into our style sheet. First of all, we are going to use the universal selector to say that we want to have a margin of 0, a padding of 0, a box sizing of border box. And now we are going to target our navbar closed. We will say this one will have a width of 80 pixels, for example, a padding of maybe 20 pixels into every single direction. And now we obviously have to style our icons. So let's start by targeting our social icons, obviously. And we say that our social icons should have a width of 40 pixels. So this one has a width of 80 pixels. We have a padding of 20 pixels, and inside we have a width of 40 pixels. So like this should work. We will also say that our navbar close has a position of fixed, left of 0, top of 0, and a height of 100 viewport height. So it takes up the entire available space. Next up, we will style our nav icon, which will also get a width of 40 pixels as well. So now we have those icons, but now we want to have those items aligned to the top and those items aligned to the bottom. So what we can do in order to do so is we are saying this here will have a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a justify content, because now justify content refers to the main axis, so our vertical axis, so the column, of space between. So now those items are pushed to the bottom and those ones are pushed to the top. And obviously it would make sense to put those images inside of an anchor tag, for example, like so. And we're just going to repeat the exact same process for all of the other icons as well. And obviously, if you wanted to have them linked to a real page, you are just going to put the link in here. But I don't really have any socials I want to link, so I'm just going to leave this away. Now let's also start to add a shadow right here. So we're going to say navbar closed should have a box shadow of maybe offset X of 10 pixels, Y of 0 pixels, shadow strength of maybe 15 pixels, and we're going to say RGBA of 0, 0, 0, which is black, and let's use maybe a transparency of 0.5 3, for example. And now we have this effect, but I think this is a little bit too strong, so we're going to use 0.1. Obviously, you can experiment with the shadow, but for me, this works for now. Next up, we obviously need to create our open version of the navbar. So what we can do in order to make or to work on this version, we are going to say that this one has a display of none, like so. So now it's gone. And we are saying that we will just show this navbar once we also have the class of active, and we are going to set this active class dynamically via JavaScript later on. So we say this one has a display of blocks. So once navbar closed has the class of active, we are going to display it. Otherwise, we are not going to display it. And we're going to do the exact same thing for our navbar open. So we'll say navbar open will have a display of none for now. And only if navbar open also has the class of active at the same time, then we will set display to block. And I'm going to show you how this works. So now if we say that navbar open, for example, has a class of active, it will display, but we don't have any content. So I'm going to put some content in. So as you can see, we now have some content. If I'm going to remove this class, the content is gone. And if I get the class back here, the content is here again. And we are going to set this class dynamically via JavaScript. So every time the user is going to click this button, we will set or remove the class of active. So now let's start to style this class, obviously. And for those icons, we can pretty much use the exact same things. So we can just go in here, put them in, and now we have those icons. Also, I want to go in here and instead of navbar close and navbar open, I also want to tag our anchor tag. So what we are going to do is we're going to take this one. We are going to say navbar close anchor and navbar minus open anchor, and we want to have a text decoration of none, because right now you see that we have this underline which is really buggy but looks terrible, and we're just going to remove this by setting text decoration to none for the anchor text. Now obviously we should maybe use the exact same styles for our navbar open, so we will just go ahead and copy those ones into our navbar open right here. So now we have the exact same style. And obviously, once it is active, we are not going to set this one to display of flex. And we can also remove display of flex right here, because we are rather going to set flex right here, because we don't want it to be blocked, but we want it to be flex basically. And now we are also going to replace this icon with the next icon. So what we can do in order to do so is we're going to say this here is not the menu.png, but it is the close.png. And now we have this X icon right here. And now for the open navbar, we also want to set a different width. And we are going to say that we want to have a width of 500 pixels, for example, or let's say 400, because maybe 500, yeah, 400 is kind of right. And obviously you need to use a media query later on to make this responsive, but for now this works. And now right below this button, we maybe want to have our nav items as well. So we want to use a navigation bar, and we can say, okay, let's put this inside of a div, for example. And right below we have our nav items, and those nav items are basically going to be buttons in our case. Those buttons will redirect us to a home page. So we say home, to a man's page, for example, a woman page, as well as a contact form. So now we have those buttons right here. Obviously they are looking terrible, but we can change that by saying, let's target our nav bar and let's give it a display of flex, a flex direction of column, a gap of maybe 10 pixels, like so. And now we're going to style the buttons inside of our navbar by saying, let's give our button a width of fit content, a background of transparent, a border of 0, a font size of maybe 1 rem. I'm also going to change our font family for our entire document. So I'm going to say body will have a font family of system UI. And now I'm also going to say that I'm probably going to use 1.6 rem, or let's say 1.4. And I want to have a margin top to our entire navbar of maybe 40 pixels, like so. So now we have this effect. Obviously those buttons should have a cursor of pointer, so they look clickable to the user. And let's also give them a letter minus spacing of 0.15 characters. So this looks a little bit more modern in my opinion. We can maybe increase the gap to 15 pixels, and now we have this navigation bar. And obviously you can style this according to your needs, but I think this looks kind of alright right now. I need to style our .socials right now. I don't know if I accidentally deleted it or if I never styled it, but yeah. So yeah, let's use flex direction of column, and now we have them aligned vertically as again. So what we're going to do next is we need to make this button clickable, and we also need to show the user that this button is actually clickable. So what we can do in order to do so is we're going to say our nav icon has a cursor of pointer, so this looks clickable. And once the user is going to click on this icon, we also want to change the class that we've basically set here. So this class, we want to change this one from active to basically none. So the class should just be removed. And once the user clicks on this icon, the class should be added to our closed menu, if you want to say it like that. So we're just going to toggle this on and off. So we can do so by, first of all, obviously getting our nav bar closed and our nav bar open. So we will say index.js. We are going to get nav bar closed is equal to document.getElement by ID, and we get our document, so our nav bar closed right here. And now we'll also need our nav bar open, which is equal to document.getElement by ID nav bar minus open. So now we have the nav bar open and the nav bar closed inside of JavaScript, but we also need to get the buttons, so we can register the button clicks. And we will get the buttons by giving our button a different class. So we first of all have to put this image inside of a button, and we also need to put our other image inside of a button, and we can also give this button an ID. This one can, for example, be button minus open, because this one will open the menu, and the other one will be button minus close, for example. So this one will close the nav menu, and we're going to take this button, put it to the bottom, and we're going to save this. And this one will obviously be the nav bar close button. So let's go into our index.js and let's say const close button is equal to document get element by ID. We take the button minus close, and const open button is equal to document.get element by ID, and we are just going to take our button minus open right here, like so. Now obviously we should probably style those buttons, so we're going to go into CSS, and we are actually just going to remove the background. So we will say background is transparent and the border is none. So now we have this effect, we have a clickable button, and this should actually work. So now we need to add the event listener to our buttons. So what we're going to do is we're going to say open button dot add event listener. We're going to listen to the click event, and once the user clicks on the button, so once we click on the open button, we will basically make our navbar open visible. So we say navbar open class list dot add, and we're going to add the class of active to our navbar open, and we are going to say navbar close dot class list dot remove, and we're going to remove the active class. And now we can actually just copy and paste this one right here, and now we're going to say close button, and obviously once we click on the close button, we want to remove the active class from our navbar open, and we want to add it to our navbar close, because we basically want to close our open button. And as you can see, now this one works perfectly fine. Now let's also create some sub pages, so I can show you why this form or this way of creating a navigation bar is super efficient and makes your web app a lot faster than normal web apps. So let's first of all create a comment that basically tells us this is our home page. Now this here is, for example, our men's page. We're going to duplicate this comment. This here will be our women's section, and this one will be our contact section. Now we will, for example, say, okay, this here is a section that maybe has an ID of man, and inside of this section we can just have some random placeholder text. It doesn't even matter too much, as you can see, like so. Now we can take the exact same section. We're going to copy it a couple of times for women, for contact. We're going to replace the ID and say this one is contact, this one is women, for example, this one is man, and this one is home. So now we have those sections. And as you can see, we also have this terrible overflow. So what we can do in order to fix this is we're going to say navbar open has a background of white, for example, and a set minus index of 2. So it's definitely in front of our page or in front of the page items. And now we're going to do the same for navbar minus close. So we are saying let's put this right here. And now, as you can see, our navbar is always in front of our items. So now you can see we have 4 pages right here, but we only want to toggle the page that we are currently on. So we will say home. So I want to show you that this really works. Man, women, and contact right here, for example. So now, as you can see, we also should change our active class, because by default, I think the class of active should belong to our closed navbar, because if you reload the page, you obviously want to have a closed navbar. So we are going to set class to active for our closed version. So as you can see, this works, but now we have those different pages and we only want to show the page that suits to the selected page right now. So we can again use the class of active to handle this. First of all, we are going to give every single section a custom data attribute, and we can name this data attribute whatever we want. So we'll say data.page, because this is basically our page, and we will say that this is the home page, for example. Now we're going to copy this data page attribute and give this data.page attribute to every single one of our sections. So this is data page equal to man, data page equal to woman, and data page equal to contact, for example. So now we have this data page attribute right here. And now we also want to add a data button attribute to every single one of our nav buttons. So we can go right here and say data minus page minus button, for example. And let's just say this one is equal to home. And we are going to use the exact same values that we've used for our data page as well. So we will use home, man, women, and contact. So we say right here, this is contact, women, man, and home. And now we are going to get those buttons inside of JavaScript, every button that has the data page button attribute basically, and we will select every single one of them. So we are going to say const data page button, or we are just going to say page button is equal to document.query selector all, and we want to get every single one of the items that has this attribute. And as you can see, if I'm going to console.log this one, so the page buttons, and I'm going to show you in a console, we have this node list that has 4 buttons right here. And so right now we are going to do the exact same thing with our pages. So we will say pages is equal to data minus page. So we will select all of the pages right here with a query selector as well. So now we have the pages and we have the button, and we want to add an event listener to every single one of those pages. So we will say page button dot for each. Every time we are going over those page buttons, we will get one single button for the for each loop. So we'll say this one is a button, and once the user clicks on this button, on every single one of these buttons, we want to add an event listener that will listen to a click event. And once the user clicks on this button, we obviously want to change whether the value of this button, so I'm going to console.log this one for you, console.log btn.dataset, for example. And now let's just console.log this. We're going to click one of those buttons. And as you can see, we are getting page button of home. So we'll get this, if we're going to access button.dataset, we are getting this object that includes the page button property. So what we can do now is we can say button.dataset.page button, for example. And if we are going to click a certain page button, we are getting the value of the certain page button. So now what we can do as well is we are going, instead of this event listener, we will check whether this button dataset.page button is equal to the value of one of those pages. So what we can do next is we can go over every single one of those pages. So we can say pages dot for each. We are getting one single page, and obviously this page again has page.dataset because we use the data attribute. And obviously we can just log this one in the console. So let's just console.log page.dataset. So you will see what this looks like as well. We're going to console.log this once we click. And as you can see, we now have the page home. So page.dataset.page will log the certain pages. So now we have the button that we clicked, which is women for now, for example, and the 4 pages that we are logging. And inside of this page loop, we're basically checking if page.dataset.page is equal to button.dataset.page button. And if this is the case, then obviously the page we want to get to is the same page that we've basically clicked, or the same button we've basically clicked. So what we can do in this case is we can say that we are going to take our page and we are going to add a class to this class list, which is basically active. So we are going to add the class of active to the page that has the exact same data attribute name that our button has. So by doing so, we are linking our buttons to our pages. And if this is not the case, we obviously want to remove from our class list the class of active. Because yeah, if it wasn't the page, this page is not active anymore. So we need to remove it. And now we obviously also need to add the active class to our homepage, for example. So we'll say class is equal to maybe page and active, for example. And all of our other sections are only going to get the class of page, for example. And I'll show you why I'm going to do this in a second, because now we can actually go into our into our style.css file, and right here we can target our .page and we can say display is none basically. But if our .page has the class of active as well, then display will be blocked. And as you can see now, we are only seeing our homepage because this is the only class that has the active class right here. But if I'm going here and going to say man, and I'm going to close this again, you can see that we are now on the man's page. And if I'm going to click women, we are now on the women's page. So now we should maybe also close the nav bar once the user clicks on this item. And what we can do in order to do so, we can again go into our index.js file. And obviously we want to use exactly what we're using when we are closing the page. And what we can do is right after this pages.forEach loop, we are just going to close our nav bar. So let's go to man, we close the bar, and we are on our man's page, women's page, contact page, home page. So as you can see, now our navigation is literally instant. So this is a super smooth and great user experience, because most HTML pages, if you think about it, first you click on a button, the page reloads because you need to load another page, and then the user gets to the other page. But right here you have a page that literally works instantly and is super accessible for the user. So instead of this section, we are now going to create this type of layout. So at the left, we are going to have text, another text, a paragraph, and a button. And at the right, we are going to have this image that includes 4 more buttons that allow you to toggle between different colors. So in order to do so, we can create a div, and we will create another style sheet that has the name of general.css. And inside of this general.css style sheet, we want to create some general styles that we can reuse over and over again, similar to Tailwind CSS, in case you know that. But it doesn't really matter too much. So we're going to say .flex, for example. We say we want to have display of flex. Then we want to have .justify minus center, for example. This will justify content to the center. Then let's also use justify minus between, which will justify the content with some space between. And let's use .align minus center to align our items to the center. And we will add some more styles over time, but for now, this is enough to show you how this exactly works. So now whenever I'm going to create something and I want to use one of those reusable classes and want to give a certain style to an element, I can just go ahead, say class is equal to flex, for example. And now I created a flex box for this div, for example. And if I want to have justify center, for example, or justify my content to the center, I can just use justify minus center. So this is great about using these reusable styles, because you can use them over and over again, and you can do all sorts of combinations with just a couple lines of CSS and HTML. And for me, this is really the preferred way to code, because this makes everything so clean and adjustable, in my opinion. So obviously for this one, we want to have a div that has basically a flex box and adjusts the item next to each other. At the left, we want to have another div, and this div should include text, 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 and the button. And at the right, we want to have another div, and that one should include the image as well as some buttons. So let's start by creating a left side, for example, left side, and let's also say we want to have a right side. And to the right, we obviously have a div that includes an image, for example, and this image could be in our images folder and could be our shoe 1, for example. So now we will have this image, and right below this image, we want to have some buttons, and I will create some button placeholders that will have the different colors. And let's say the class is color, so we can style all of those buttons together. And our first button will probably have, or let's do that in a second. Our first button will have the color blue, our second button will have the color red, our third button will have the color green, and our last button will have the color black, as you can see inside of this layout. Now we also need this text, which could, for example, be inside of a div. This could be our h1 text and should be boost your speed, for example. Right below this text, we, for example, have $50.00, like so. Or we are going to do it the other way around. So yeah, this could be kind of right. And now we maybe also want to have a paragraph. So we're just going to copy and paste this paragraph in here. So let's go, and we're going to save this, and right below this paragraph, we have a button. And obviously we need to put this here inside of paragraph. Right below this paragraph, we're going to create a button, and this button says shop now, for example. Shop now we obviously also need to style all of those elements, so we can go ahead and do so. So as you can see, this is our page right now. Maybe we should also take a look at it inside of our full screen mode from time to time. So as you can see, now both of these items are below each other. So obviously we need to change that by styling our entire sections. So let's give this shoe a class of header minus image, for example. So we can start to target this header image. We're going to go into our style.css. We will say .header image. It will have a width of, let's say, 700 pixels, for example. If we go into full screen mode, as you can see, it still doesn't really work because this paragraph takes up 100% of the available space, so there's no space for our shoe. So we need to define a certain width for our paragraph as well, and we can do so by saying we are going to give this one a class of heading minus, or header minus paragraph, for example, and we're going, or let's say text, just a little bit shorter, header minus text. We're going to go into our style.css, we're going to target header text, and let's say the width is maybe 40 characters, for example. And I think this might still be a little bit too much, but it's all right for now. So let's also create some different font sizes. Let's, for example, say .font minus XS is equal to a font size of 0.5 rem, which should be 8 pixels because it's like probably a little bit too much, but I just want to see how this looks. So we are going to use, or we are going to include our style sheet, obviously, first of all. So we will say link :CSS, and now we want to add our general.css file as well. And now, as you can see, those two, they're aligned next to each other already. Obviously still looks pretty terrible, so what we're going to do next, we're going to test our text that we've just created. So we'll use font minus XS as a class for our text right here. And now we have this super small text, which is obviously way too small. So we'll say 0.7, for example, or let's use 0.8. Yeah, let's go ahead and use 0.7. So font XS is 0.8. Let's use font SM of maybe 0.9. Let's use font MD of maybe 1 rem. Let's go ahead and say font LG, for example. Obviously we can change those values later on, as maybe 0.2, and let's say font XL should like really be big, so let's say we want to have maybe 2 rem, which should be equal to maybe 32 pixels as far as I know. And font XXL, let's like make this super big, let's say 4 rem. And now we want to use font XL probably for this header, as you can see. So let's say this one has a class of font XXL, like so, and I think this looks pretty much alright. Now let's also define a class to say .w minus 80, which sets the width to 80%, because we will need this pretty often, and you will see in a second why we are going to need this pretty often. Because right now, as you can see, I want to have w minus 80 right here. So this only takes up 80% of the available space, this container basically. And inside of this container, I want the items to have justify between. So I want to have the shoe to the right, and I want to have this one to the left. Maybe we're gonna name this items minus center, and let's now use items minus center right here. So now our items are centered as well. And now I want to have this entire div in the center of our page. And now I'm going to take a wrapper div for this div. I put all of the content inside of this div, and now I say class of this div is basically flex and justify phi minus center. So our entire content gets centered. Now, as you can see, this container centers everything in the center, and this container takes up 80% of the available space. So this container is 80% of the available space, and the wrapper container basically centers those 80% inside of the 100% container. Hope this makes sense, like really weird way to explain it, but yeah. Now let's also create some font styles to create bold font, for example, by saying font weight is equal to bold. Let's use .thin, which makes font weight equal 300, and now we are going to use those styles to style our text right here. Let's say this one is thin and this has font minus LG, for example, or let's say XL, for example. And now this here is a little bit bigger as well, but I think that actually XL is not enough and LG is not enough as well. So what we can do is, I say this one is here, this one could actually be 1.8 and this one could actually be 2.5. And now this looks a little bit better to me. Now I'm also going to create some margins. So let's see, mt minus 1 is equal to a margin top of 10 pixels. We're going to save this and we're going to create mt2, mt3, mt4 and mt4 is probably enough. So we'll say mt2 is equal to 20 pixels, mt3 is equal to 30 pixels and mt4 is equal to 40 pixels. And now we'll give those margins wherever we need them. So for example, I think this paragraph right here or this button could, for example, need a margin top of maybe 1. So we have, or let's say 2. So we have 20 pixels of margin. And we'll also give this one a class of button and button minus orange. So we'll create some base classes now, and one of those classes will be button and one of those classes will be button orange. And button will basically create the base style for this button. So how the button, so basically the form of the button, how wide the button is, how round the button is, and so on. And button orange will create the color, so basically the skin of this button. So let's go ahead and do so. We're going into our general.css. We say our .button has a padding, for example, of 10 pixels top and 40 pixels left and right. Let's use border of radius of 30 pixels, for example. So we have round borders, a border of 0. A cursor of pointer, so now it looks like this. And now let's also start to create .button minus orange, which will have a color of white, a font minus size of maybe 1.2 rem, or let's go ahead with 1.1 rem. And now we obviously also want to have this orange background color. So what we can do is we can just click on inspect and we can just copy this hex code right here and use this one for our button as well. So we say background is equal to this hash code. So now we should have this effect right now. And as you can see, this looks pretty good already. So next up, I also want to create the color buttons at the bottom. So as you can see, if we're going to this page, we have those color buttons. And I think they look pretty good. So I want to have them as well. And in order to do so, we need to style our color buttons. So we can, first of all, again, create a style for .color, and we say this one has a width of maybe 20 pixels, a height of 20 pixels, and a border minus radius of 50%. So now we have those circles. Now let's also say cursor is a pointer and the border is 0. As you can see, now they look like this, but obviously it still doesn't look too good. So we will give the several colors. So color of blue is, for example, let's say background, and we get some random blue, for example. So we can copy this one and let's just choose a different kind of blue, like this, for example, like so. And now we have blue. Maybe we are going to take a different color. And now we are just going to copy blue. And we obviously also need red, green, as well as black. And for black, we can, for example, choose a dark color like this one. For green, we can just choose any random green color. For red, we can choose a red color, maybe like so. And now we have our colors, and maybe green should be slightly darker. Yes, like so. I mean, obviously you can adjust those colors according to your needs, but I think this one is kind of right for me now. Now we can maybe also create a wrapper for those colors and say, okay, all of those colors maybe belong into a div, and we say that this div has a class of maybe colors, or let's just say flex, and we want to have a gap as well, so we'll say gap 1, and we are going to create this gap inside of our general.css file because we will probably reuse them pretty often. So let's say .gap -1 has a gap of 10 pixels. Then we're just going to copy this code, and we will probably need everything up to gap 4 during this project. So let's use gap 1. Gap 2 has 20 pixels, gap 3 has 30 pixels, and gap 4 has 40 pixels. So now we have a certain gap between our items, as you can see. And maybe we want to have those items aligned to the end. So what we can do is you can create .justify -end, and we can say justify content flex end, for example. So now let's go here and say justify end, and now our items are aligned to the end of the container. And I think like this, it already really starts to look pretty good in my opinion. So now when we click a button, we basically need to register this button click, and we need to say, okay, now let's probably display our red shoes or our blue shoes whatsoever. And we can again do this by using JavaScript. And this works pretty much exactly the same as the pages. So we are first going to use data -color for our buttons, for example, and we will say data -button -color, for example, and this one will have a color of blue, obviously. Now we're going to select this data attribute. We use this data attribute for every single button. This one will have red, this one will have green, and this one will obviously have black. And now we have data button color, but we should probably also give every single image a class of maybe active, or one of them has the class of active, and every single one of them has a data color as well. And we are going to remove our button. Now we have a data color right here. We use a data color right here, a data color right here, and a data color right here. And this one will have a data color of probably, I think the second one was red, green, and black, but it doesn't really matter too much. So this one will have shoe2.jpg 3 and 4. So we have 4 different shoes right now. And if you take a look at it, we have blue, we have red, we have green, and we have black. So we just need to change between those shoes every time the user clicks a button. So now let's detect the buttons inside of JavaScript. And we can do so by going here and saying, okay, we are going to get every single const data button, or let's say color buttons is equal to document.query selector all, and we are going to select all of our buttons by doing so. And now we also need const color images, for example, is equal to document.query selector all, and again we are going to select our data.color attribute because we have data button color and we have data color right here. And data color gives us all of the images, data button color gives us all of the buttons. And now we need to add an event listener to every color button click basically. So what we can do in order to do so is we can say color buttons.for each. We are getting one of those buttons every time we loop over those color buttons, and we are going to add an event listener to every single one of those buttons. And every time the user is going to click on this button, we obviously need to take a look at so we're going to console.log our button.dataset to take a look at how this basically looks. So we're going to go into full screen mode. Let's take a look at our buttons. They should be down here. We're going into the console, and once we click, we basically get button color. So let's take a look at .btn color. And right now, if we click the button, we get red, green, black, and blue. So we can basically detect the color of our buttons already, of the clicks already. And now we also need to loop over every single colors images. So we can do colors images.for each. We get one of those images every time we loop over this one. And for every images, we also need to check images. Or we're going to console.log it, so you understand it. Console.log images.dataset. Let's take a look at that one. And as you can see, once I click on a certain button, let's do it, we're going to get this element right here that has the color property. So we can access the color property for every single image by doing this. And now if we click on the image, we get the color properties. So red, blue, red, green. This one was the color of the click button, and this is the color of our shoe items basically. And now what we can do is we are going to check if images.dataset.color is equal to button.dataset.button color. So basically, if our color of the image is equal to the color of the button that we've clicked right now, then we are going to set the images.classlist.add to active, because now we want to add the class active to our images list. And else we are going to say images.classlist.remove, and we are going to remove the active item. And now what we can do inside of our style.css, we obviously need to target our images, header image, and we can say this one will have a display of none, and only if .header-image has the class of active, we'll set this image to display block. So only then this image will be visible. And by default, we say that our only visible image is basically our blue image. So now let's take a look, and if we are selecting red it works, if we are selecting green it works, if we are selecting black it works, and if we are selecting blue it works as well. So by doing so, now our card, our item really seems to work. And as you can see, it is as simple as that to create a header like this in HTML, CSS and JavaScript.